of all the animals, the serpent was the most beautiful and intelligent. This is taken from the very first book of the Bible, Genesis, that God had made. One day, Satan used the serpent to speak to Eve. When she came close to the forbidden tree, the serpent said, "Didn't God restrict your freedom by not letting you eat from any tree you wanted?" Genesis 3, verse 1. Sermon titled today is Two Women and a Snake. So we're going to be talking about women and snakes. Let's just bow our heads as we begin. Father, it's indeed a privilege and an honor for us to be here today, to lift our voices in praise for one, but to just hear what you have to say to us so that we, sitting here, can be ready for the day when Jesus comes to take us to our eternal home. In his name we pray. Amen. I realize that to most people who are members of our church already have, for the most part, a knowledge of what we're going to be talking about today. I also must tell you that we record these messages to be shown to a large number of people who may not know what the message is. And so this may be old hat to some of you, but to some others, this is all new. This is all new stuff. So I give a message like this every once in a while for two very important reasons. One is for those who may not know what we know about what the Bible has to say. And number two, just to review for us who do know it. We need to review it once in a while and just kind of reinforce it in our own lives. With that said, I begin with these words about women and snakes. Women, for the most part, do not like snakes. The reason for that is explained in the Bible. Did you know that? It's explained in the Bible, in the book of Genesis. It happened after the first woman, we'll talk about this first woman for a while, who was Eve, was tempted and drawn away into sin by a serpent. And you know the story. It was a snake which was controlled by the devil, and this serpent or this snake spoke for the devil to Eve, this woman. Of all the animals, the serpent was the most beautiful and intelligent that God had made. One day, Satan used the serpent to speak to Eve. When she came close to the forbidden tree, the serpent said, "Didn't God restrict your freedom by not letting you eat from any tree you wanted?" This first woman hung around and listened. That was the problem. She hung around and she listened to this snake's words. And of course, she was deceived. We all know the story. She should have run away, but she didn't. It was then that God placed the fear of, and the hatred, really, of snakes in this woman's heart, in this woman's life. Listen to the other parts of Genesis 3. Then God said to the serpent, "Because you were used as a tool of Satan, I cannot continue to let you be the most beautiful creature in the garden. You will now be lower than any of the animals and will crawl on the ground eating dust. Also, I will place a hatred of sin in the heart of the woman and her descendants." Now, that's from the Clear Word Bible. When we read it from the Revised Standard Version or the King James Version or the New King James Version or the New International Version, it says, "I will put enmity." Enmity, the root word is enemy. I will make you an enemy. I will put enmity between you. That is, he's talking to the serpent now. He's talking to the devil. I will put enmity between you and the woman. She's always going to be your enemy. Now, I must admit that men are afraid of snakes too. Yeah, they are. I get startled by a snake. The snake's laying there, and you almost walk upon it before you see it. It might move a little bit or something, and whoa. So, ladies, don't feel like I'm picking on you today. I have this neighbor lady. Her name is Stephanie, and I mow their lawn because he lives right next to me, and the husband has hay fever and he can't do the grass, and so I mow their lawn. And sometimes I will see a snake. She will not step foot in her backyard, and she hasn't for a long time because years ago, Jane, she saw a snake in her yard. And she just has a rough time walking through her yard. And she has me cut the grass really short, really short. And I know I've told this story before, but when we first moved to Denver in 1975, I think it was, we had a lot of boxes in our basement that we left there for, I don't know, several days because we were in an evangelistic series. The very night we moved here was the beginning of an evangelistic series, and so we didn't get to open those boxes for weeks. And so one day I'm out mowing the lawn in our backyard, and I'm hearing in the distance this faint scream over the sound of the mower. And I'm thinking it must be a neighbor lady who's yelling at a kid, or maybe a dog got, I don't know what it was, but it kept going, the screaming. And so I shut the mower off, and I discovered that it was Joanne. She was in our basement, and she was just screaming, "Bob! Bob!" So I go in the house and I said, "What in the world is the matter?" "Snake! It's a snake!" And I said, "Where?" "Under that box." I lifted the box. Here is a snake that's this thin. It was dried up. It was not any longer than this. It looked like a fishing worm. It was flat. And she was screaming over this. God put enmity between the snake and the woman. Boy, and he's made it last for a long, long time. Today's message is about two different women at two different times in history, but it's the same snake. And the instances, now listen to this, the instances are separated by thousands of years. And people understandably would ask, a snake lasts for thousands of years? Snakes die too. Well, this one didn't. Still hasn't. The first woman's part in the story in Genesis is restated, revisited in the last book of the Bible, in the book of Revelation. Listen to John tell us how it all started, and then we'll read a little more about this woman. It says the great dragon, called the devil and Satan, that ancient serpent, which means he's been around for a long time, ancient snake, who is leading the whole world. Don't kid yourself, he's leading you away, leading you astray too, was thrown out of heaven, that snake, that serpent, the devil, thrown out of heaven and came down to the earth with his angels. So he had some angels that came with him. A lot of them. A lot of angels came with him. So the first woman in Genesis saw a beautiful snake. And this snake was sitting in a tree that was forbidden to the human family. And he started talking to this woman, started talking to Eve. At that moment, Satan knew that he had her attention because she talked back. She was being fooled, deceived, lied to, and misled by a professional. He was a professional deceiver. You know how you can tell? A third of the angels. A third of the angels fell with him. She should have run from the place as fast as she could, but she didn't. And the world has paid a dreadful price ever since. we're fanning ourselves because of it. That's one of them. We're not comfortable. It's always a tremendous insight for me to read from the Conflict of the Ages series. There's 5 books in that series. And in Patriarchs and Prophets, which is the very first book in that series, I read these words. In order to accomplish his work unperceived, Satan chose to employ as his medium the serpent, a disguise well adapted for his purpose of deception. The serpent was then one of the wisest and most beautiful creatures on earth. It had wings, we're told, and while flying through the air, presented an appearance of dazzling brightness, having the color and brilliancy of burnished gold. You see, that's probably why God condemned him to be on the ground, to crawl along the ground, because once he was a beautiful thing that flew. Resting in the rich-laden branches of the forbidden tree and regaling itself with the forbidden fruit, that is, eating this stuff, probably slobbering over it and everything else. It was an object to arrest the attention and delight the eye of the beholder. Thus, in the garden of peace lurked the destroyer, watching for his prey. My dad was a duck hunter. He liked to hunt ducks. He had a duck blind out in the Mississippi River. Now, the Mississippi River where we lived was a mile wide, and in a lot of parts of it, it was about knee deep. So they had a duck blind there in some of the shallower parts of, and they had ducks, fake ducks, and they were anchored, and so they could throw them out in the water and they would stay there, and ducks flying over would look down and see these ducks on the water, and they would fly in close, take a look, and they get shot. Many times we had duck for lunch. We ate ducks. The problem with Adam and Eve's sin as compared to the duck's sin, only the duck died. With Adam and Eve, everybody dies. What a sad thing. As I said many times, we had duck for dinner, and every one of those ducks was fooled. Was fooled into death. The Bible tells us that Eve was just like one of those ducks. To the duck flying over the water, seeing all the ducks down there and having what they perceived was a good time, they thought, this is better than wearing out our wings flying all day. Let's just go down there. Serpent did the same thing to Eve. You're not going to die, he said. You're going to be enriched. You're going to have knowledge. I was talking to a lady the other day, right here in the church parking lot. She came by and asked us about our church. I told her we are Seventh Day, which means we worship on the seventh day. Adventists, we believe in the second coming of Jesus. I said, what church do you? I'm an agnostic. Agnostic. Huh. You know the word, the root word for agnostic is gnosko. That's the Greek word. And it means knowledge. She worships knowledge. It's interesting that today, a lot of people who don't believe in God believe in science. They believe in medicine, artificial intelligence. They believe in this stuff. In other words, knowledge. They're agnostics. So the serpent, Satan, has been selling knowledge all of these years, all of these centuries and thousands of years. And we can see that the world has been buying into this knowledge thing for all of this time. Instead of worshiping God, the creator of knowledge. Try to imagine, if you can, how nice it would have been if Eve would have forgotten her quest for this temporal, this temporary pleasure of knowledge of good and evil. If she had just ran to Adam or to God instead. But the first woman fell under the spell in the Garden of Eden. Thousands of years later, the second woman had learned a great lesson from the first woman. The second woman ran from the serpent. Listen to the story of the second woman and this very same serpent. He's called the dragon, of course, and the serpent, the devil, and Satan. The story of this second woman is found in Revelation chapter 12. And John is writing this story as he watches visions of heaven, from heaven, and it's about God's church and his people, and he's just had a vision about the most holy place. And then he says, next I was given a series of visions to help God's people understand more fully the final events and the fury of the dragon. I saw an amazing sign in the heavens, a woman wrapped in the light of the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a wreath of 12 stars. Revelation 12, verse 1. So who is this second woman? And what's her story? She's wrapped in light, the moon under her feet. She has a wreath or a crown on her head with 12 stars on it. These indicate that this is a good woman. Why do I say that? It's because the woman is dressed in light. She's brightness. Let's look further. We have said before that the Bible, of course, is the best interpreter of itself in Bible prophecy. So let's find out about this woman. In this chapter 12 of Revelation, God is trying to prepare his people for the last days, for the conflict that's going to come before Jesus comes again. There's going to be some problems. We're looking at some problems right now in our country and around the world. So God is trying to prepare us. In the Bible, a good woman represents God's people, that is the church. In the Old Testament, this symbol was used to indicate God's people, the Israelites, God's chosen people. The symbol is carried over into the New Testament. We know this woman is a true church because she is clothed with this light, as I mentioned before. Later in the book of Revelation, we'll find that clothing really indicates what church we're talking about. Because there's another woman later on in chapter 13 and in chapter 17 in Revelation that's not clothed in brightness, she's clothed in scarlet. So we're going to see the difference in the clothing here later on. This church is clothed with the sun, the moon, and the stars. In Genesis, we find that God was the creator of the sun, the moon, and the stars. The true church are clothed with those things that God created. And God said, you are the light of the world. Let your light so shine before men that others will see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. The woman is clothed with the sun. The sun signifies the glorious, really the glorious story of Jesus in the New Testament. That's what the sun represents here, the story of Jesus, the Son of God, salvation that comes through him, his death on the cross, his resurrection. The Bible would be just worthless literature if it didn't include Jesus, the life of Jesus. Because Jesus is the center of everything. Jesus is the center of everything on earth, really. Everything that's good. He was born in Bethlehem. He grew up to be a man who would become the foundation of the Christian church, of course. This woman is standing on the moon. The moon is the foundation. It's the foundation of the New Testament. It has borrowed its light from the sun, which is the New Testament. The clothing of this woman. She has 12 stars on her head, and we know that those represent the 12 leaders of the church. In the Old Testament, there were the patriarchs. There were the 12 patriarchs. There were the 12 tribes of Israel. In the New Testament, there's the 12 disciples. So we begin to see that this woman is a depiction of God's church, the true church. And another reason we know that this must be God's church is that Satan is about to attack her. Satan doesn't attack somebody that's already on his side. Satan is going to attack God's true church. How does he do that? The Bible goes on with the story. This woman, the second woman, was pregnant. And I heard her cry in pain, for the time had come for her to give birth. So now we see that this woman who is clothed, I want you to catch this, she's clothed with symbols that in other places represent virginity. Does that ring a bell? Mary was a virgin. You know the Christmas story. The story continues in verse 3. It says, I saw another sign in the heavens, a huge red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns, 1 crown on each head. I saw him use his powerful tail and pull down 1/3 of the stars from heaven. The dragon, I was told, represented Satan, and the stars were the angels he had pulled down from heaven with him. I saw him stand in front of the woman, waiting for her to give birth so he could kill her child as soon as he was born. Lots of things to sort out in those 2 verses. Lots of things to figure out. Who is the red dragon? Later in the chapter, called the serpent. That, of course, is the devil. We know that. He is the snake who was in the Garden of Eden. Same snake, who is still alive in the book of Revelation, and he's still alive today, destroying the world all around us. But what are the 7 heads and the 10 horns and the crowns and all of this? We're going to discover those later on when we get into chapter 13 and 17. These symbolize, just generally, they symbolize the political powers that the devil used to destroy God's church down through the ages. The devil took 1/3 of the angels of heaven when he came and when he was thrown out of heaven. The devil is now standing in front of the woman, waiting for her to give birth to this boy child, and he's going to destroy this boy child as soon as he is born. Now, we know the Christmas story. When Jesus was born, Herod, the king of Judea, heard from the Magi, these guys passing through, that there was a new king born in Jerusalem, in Bethlehem. So Herod killed all the boy babies under 2 years of age. What a dreadful time that was, trying to get at this new king that was born. But of course, the new king fled and was in Egypt. We know that story. The devil used pagan Rome to try to take the life of Christ as soon as he was born. Verse 5 tells us she gave birth to a son who would judge and rule the world. Son is capitalized. Who was going to judge and rule the world? Well, Jesus. The child was snatched away from the dragon. Remember, he fled into Egypt. And later ascended to God and to his throne. Much later, 30 years later. I saw the woman, representing God's people, run from the dragon into the wilderness. What if Eve would have done that? Run from the dragon into the wilderness to a place that is, Jesus had prepared for her, where she was taken care of for 1,260 prophetic days, each day representing a year. Taken from the Clear Word Bible again. This is the second woman. The same serpent that tempted Eve in the garden is here. The difference in the two women is that this woman ran from the dragon. Ran. Now, John takes us backwards a few thousand years. He takes us backwards in the book of Revelation to rehearse the story again. And he says, this controversy between God and the dragon began years ago in heaven. God's son, Michael. By the way, we have a Michael here. And Michael is graduating next week. We have another young person who graduated this week, and that was Haley. Haley's back there in the back. She graduated yesterday. Yesterday, right? And Mike's graduating next weekend? Wow, I can't believe it. Mike, I thought he probably 1-2 years in college. 4 years already. Guy's a genius, I'll tell you. Anyway, congratulations to our graduates. And we have some over here too. Elena graduated last week. Anyway, we're thankful for our graduates. The controversy between God and the dragon began years ago in heaven. God's son, Michael, and the loyal angels fought against the dragon and his angels. The dragon and his angels fought back, but were defeated and lost their place in heaven. The great dragon, called the devil and Satan, that ancient serpent who was leading the whole world astray, was thrown out of heaven and came down to the earth with his angels. Here we read about the serpent thrown out of heaven and came to this world to deceive Adam and Eve and to destroy the world for the rest of his existence. Here, the Bible says, those he accused overcame him by their faith in the blood of the Lamb. There's stuff here, too, that we need to take apart. The Lamb, of course, is Jesus, and by their personal witness. That's an important word, witness. That is really an important word. And they did not shrink from giving their lives to death for him who loved them. The devil is extremely angry and is coming at you with great fury. He is filled with rage because he knows his time is short. Revelation 11 and 12. We know who the Lamb is. It's Jesus, the Lamb of God, that takes away the sins of the world. How does Jesus take away the sins of the world? He takes away the sins of the world by shedding his blood, this precious Son of God, shedding his blood on the cross for you and me. We can only overcome the devil by faith in the blood of the Lamb that was shed for us. Righteousness cannot exist with unrighteousness. They cannot coexist. Christ tried to dwell with sinful man, and he was killed. But it was that death on the cross that finally defeated the devil and will bring an end one day to the serpent's deadly reign. Our salvation has been secured in the blood of Christ, as sure as the church, the pure woman in Revelation, the second woman in Revelation, you and me, that we have victory over the serpent, the dragon, the devil. The future is clear because Jesus has purchased your eternity and mine. The devil, on the other hand, knows that he has a short time. If the devil has a short time, guess what he's going to do with that time? He is going to cause all kinds of havoc. He's going to cause all kinds of great controversy. He's turning his anger against the woman, that is the church. But by our testimony, by our witness of what Jesus has done for us throughout all of our lives, we are victorious and faithful clear up to death. From a book I have read with great anticipation called The Great Controversy, I end with this paragraph. It is at midnight that God manifests his power for the deliverance of his people. The sun appears, shining in its strength. Signs and wonders follow in quick succession. The wicked look with terror and amazement upon the scene, while the righteous behold with solemn joy the tokens of their deliverance. Everything in nature seems turned out of its course. The streams cease to flow. Dark, heavy clouds come up and clash against each other. In the midst of the angry heavens is the one clear space of indescribable glory, whence comes the voice of God, like the sound of many waters, saying, "It is done."